My name is Rose Luckin and I'm your host. The integration of artificial intelligence into educational environments across the UK is a complex and multifaceted issue. While some institutions have embraced AI-powered tools for tasks like grading assignments or providing personalised learning experiences, others remain cautious or have elected not to use AI in certain classes or departments. However, one thing is clear. There is no such thing as risk-free AI. As these technologies continue to permeate our educational systems, it's crucial that we approach their adoption proactively rather than reactively. So what better way to find out more about these issues than to talk to some people who are leading AI in their schools? So today, as we explore AI's potential and its limitations for education, I'm joined by three wonderful guests in our Zoom studio. Adam Webster, Deputy Head of Innovation at Caterham School and CEO of Sphinx AI. Scott Hayden, Head of Training, Learning and Digital at Basingstoke College of Technology. And Chris Goodall, Head of Digital Education at Bourne Education Trust. And so let's get going. I'm really keen to know what's happening in each of your organisations when it comes to artificial intelligence. So the first thing I'd love you to do is to say a little bit about yourself and your role, but then tell us what's happening with respect to AI in your organisation. How many people in your organisation are using it? How have you gone about it? Give us some insights for our listeners who might be quite new to thinking about using artificial intelligence. And Scott, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Rose. So I'm the Head of Teaching, Learning and Digital at Basingstoke College of Technology, a general further education college in North Hampshire. Got about 5,000 students. We've got many learners who learn differently. Got some apprentices, got some T-level students, very, very vocational, engineering, hair and beauty, really hands-on. And with our 200 to 300 members of staff, we've been focusing on using AI to free them up to do more human tasks. Since May 2023, we turned on Google Gemini for all staff and have been using that to help with their schemes of work, with planning, resources, and we've started to see some really innovative uses of AI for helping enhance assessment, feedback. And we're only in the last term started to see our students use it in controlled prototypes with the digital team helping them to create incredible evidence using generative AI.
That's brilliant. I love that you're seeing the AI as a route to create more opportunities for human interaction, because that is what we need, isn't it? And I love this idea of evidence. I'm interested in whether there were any reticent participants. So Google Gemini available to everybody. Did everybody engage with that enthusiastically, or were there some people who perhaps were less keen?
In May of last year, Chris, one of our hospitality chef lecturers, had loads of planning to do, and he was time poor because he had baby twins with his partner at the time. And Chris, by his own admission, is not the greatest at planning. So using his menus, his straggles of half-written documents and notes on his desk, we used Google Lens to zap them up to use a particular prompt we'd worked on. And in 2.5 hours, he had his entire year planned. He was challenged to think more creatively and innovatively about his sequence of learning, which freed him up to be more present in the kitchen, in the classroom, and at home with his partner, raising those kids. And Chris and stories like that become the way in terms of people you wouldn't necessarily expect to use this really effectively. We focused on them in staff rooms and classrooms, helping them to scratch their particular itch. And as we know with teachers, it's time. That's the thing, right? So we can have those stories of people like Chris, and word of mouth spreads. And it isn't just, Scott pushing the thing he thinks he should be doing. It's got to come from our wonderful teachers. And staff well-being, giving you more time to do more human tasks, to develop those human skills that World Economic Forum and any number of different organizations have identified as being needed. UNESCO, Pearson, all these bodies have identified that there's compassion, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, empathy. We want our teachers in class focusing on developing human skills and using AI to try and free them up to have more time to focus on developing those skills in the live classroom, as it were.
That's music to my ears. I love it. I also love the Chris example. Just one quick question. You mentioned using lens, and to some people listening, they might not know what that is. Can you just give a quick explanation of what lens is, and also maybe a little bit about what Gemini does, just for people who might not be as familiar as you are?
Yeah, absolutely, Rose. So Lens, and there is a Microsoft version as well. You can use Lens to actually photograph some handwritten notes or some text from a magazine, for example, and to essentially suck up the text and turn it into a digital font, as it were, which you can then edit and adapt as you see fit. So we've been doing that quite a bit with a lot of our, we favor handwritten notes because the science is pretty robust about note taking. Handwritten is pretty undeniable in terms of its improved impact on retention. So our handwritten notes are taken and then adapted into text and then used to be adapted in our tool like Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot, whatever you're using. We use Gemini because we're a Google reference college. And Google Gemini is essentially a generative AI tool, a really good auto predict, a chatbot like ChatGPT, where you can speak to the large language model and to get it to do particular tasks for you. So that's what we've been doing. And our staff have been doing really cool stuff. Exemplars, case studies, content for slides, scenarios, starters, plenaries. They've got this thought partner now. It's not going to do the job for them. It's going to help with some tasks. And it's that way of framing it that we've approached this whole topic with.
Great. That's great. Thank you. It's really good to get those explanations out so that people listening can think, oh, maybe I could have a go at that.
We're trying our best. We've got a really innovative leader, our principal, and I can knock on his door and say, Anthony, I want to translate you into 5 languages to welcome our refugee learners.
Fantastic.
And he will let me do it, so I don't take that for granted. And it's a leader like that providing opportunities for me with controlled, mitigated risks. I've got a 3-tick process: teaching and learning team, IT team, and GDPR team. Anything we test always goes through those measures. But then Anthony, our principal, he loves taking these chances because he understands and is attuned to what's needed. And that's ultimately what wins out, right? What do the students need? And they need to understand how to bottle this lightning and use it well. So we're focusing now on a student AI module as well for September, because we focused on staff first. Next year is going to be helping the students to use this the right way, as our guest Chris Goodall today will no doubt touch on, helping students use AI well. In particular, his Snapchat example was wonderful, and that really resonated with me, Chris, when I saw that on LinkedIn. Your use of teaching students how to use Snapchat AI, which is where many of our young people are, to use that well. I thought that was just wonderful teaching.
Thanks, Scott. That's fantastic. And so from Chef Chris to Head of Digital Chris Goodall, you've just been mentioned, and I'm going to come to you next. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, yeah, and thanks, Scott, as well, and thanks, Rose. So I'm Chris Goodall, Head of Digital Education for the Bourne Education Trust. To be honest, this is a fairly new role for me. So I only started this role across the trust in September. I've spent the rest of my 25, I think, years in teaching and actually in classrooms, in and out, but mainly in classrooms. And when ChatGPT came around, I was using it in the classroom for most of the year, which is where I sort of gained my experience from. And then we rolled it out across the school. So the school I was in have now been using it, and again, trying to experiment with it for about a year and a half now. And now my role is to roll that out, a similar model, and what I've learned across the whole trust. So in terms of how many of our staff are using it, it's hugely varied across those 26 schools. So there are, just like in any school, you get possibly about a third of the staff who are really pushing forward and innovating and experimenting. You might have another third that are trialing various bits and pieces, and you might have some resistance and fearful staff. So we've got a real cross section. If I was to estimate, I would say possibly about 60% of staff. And again, we focused on training staff rather than the students massively. We focused on, let's get the teachers really understanding, let's get the support staff really understanding this. So we've done training for our teachers, we've done training for our head teachers and leadership teams, for our TAs, our office staff, for our parents. That's all part of the offer that we've put out. for every school, and we've got various levels of adoption. How staff are using it, it's hugely varied. So we've sold generative AI, and we focused on large language models. So we started with ChatGPT. We use Copilot, but we don't massively prescribe, although we go for safety. So we recommend the safer routes. But we've sold it as a multi-purpose tool. So rather than say, right, here's AI, you can use it for this, this, and this, we've said, right, what's your problem? Use AI to solve that problem. And again, this is where you get to resistant or fearful staff. This is where that approach is so good. So as well as giving a presentation around AI, I do hands-on training. And so where you get people in the classroom, I say, what's the next 3 things you were about to do? Let me help you and show you how AI can make that either better, quicker, or support you in doing that. And again, it's not do it for you, it's support you in doing that. And I rarely get resistance with that sort of model, because you're basically giving someone a hand to do stuff they're already doing. In terms of students, again, we're doing some very small scale pilots with students. In fact, I was doing some analysis of data this morning around various pilots. So we're at the early stages with students. But again, we focused on teachers because, again, when I was in the classroom using it, I was having loads of conversations with students about that use. And there was a lot, ethical issues being brought up. There's so much that's brought up in a classroom when you're using it and experimenting with the teacher. We know the kids are using it. So it's about opening up those conversations. So that's sort of been our approach to it.
I love the emphasis on teachers, but of course, you're right. The students are using this technology anyway, and they need to help as well. So it's great to hear that you're looking at some students' use cases too. I think it's really interesting, this model that you have. And I can see how well it works in an organization like yours, where you have somebody like you who can lead the way and who is confident with the technology, can put people's minds at rest, can show them the practical ways to use it. But our benchmarking study is revealing that actually the level of training and continuing professional development available to the majority of teachers is not great. And therefore, there will be a lot of people listening who probably don't have a Chris. How could they practically start to engage with this, do you think?
I think it's got to start with the leadership team. Like any school initiative, this isn't, forget AI. If you're launching anything in a school, you need to have the leadership team and the head teacher, the top of that organisation, fully bought in and who understand the wider implications of introducing things into school. So the typical thing with any tech in the past has been, and I'm generalizing here, it's been a computer science teacher who's quite interested in a bit of tech who generally launches it. And there's real dangers there's positives to that, but there's real dangers to it as well. So it's got to start with the top. It's got to start with a planned approach to introduction of AI or any initiative. So I would say, in terms of starting that process, you have also got to be organic as well. So there's a top-down element that needs to happen. But again, I would say schools in the past, certainly in the last 5-10 years, have really grabbed hold of the evidence-based approach. And we started to see small hubs and teams in schools driving that, where staff had an interest and a skill in that. I think we're at a stage where you also need innovation hubs in school in a similar way, where you trial things on a small scale so that you can control that rollout a little bit. You can control the risks a little bit. And then when you learn what you learn, you can then share amongst the wider body of staff. So yes, I think the magic ingredient is having someone who's passionate on the leadership team and also can speak the language of human rather than tech. Those are your magical ingredients. But without that, you're going to need more structure in place.
I love the magical ingredients and the talking human. That makes sense. So I guess it is a bit of a shout out to leaders, isn't it? Scott mentioned leadership. You've mentioned leadership, Chris, and it feels as if the leadership part is inevitably, and as ever, super important in this perspective. So I'm going to come to Adam next. Thank you, Chris. That was great. And I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate the kinds of tips that you've given them. Adam, over to you.
Hi, Rose. Thanks very much. I'm Adam Webster. I'm Deputy Head Innovation at Caterham School, also an English teacher. And I'm also the CEO of Sphinx AI, which is a subsidiary company of Caterham School. So I originally started at Caterham a really long time ago with the mission of seeing if digital learning was going to be a thing or not. And it turned out 12 years later, it definitely was. We were one of the first one-to-one iPad schools in the UK. And so we've been talking about teaching, learning and technology kind of integrating for a really, really long time. It has informed lots of the way we've developed the curriculum. We've, in fact, developed our own curriculum subject called Edge, which speaks to so many of the values that Scott and Chris have already spoken about in terms of those sort of softer skills, the kind of outward-facing, future-looking, forward-looking skills marrying together with the digital. That's what we do in Edge, which is very project-based, very collaborative. And so really when AI kind of popped up on everybody's radar, we felt quite ready for it. The first thing we did was write a policy, which sounds terribly boring, but it's amazing when you speak to other schools how many have sort of stumbled at that very first hurdle, not really knowing what to do, what to write, what to say. And actually our AI policy is less than a side of A4, and it basically says we as teachers will tell students when we're using AI, students will tell us when they've used AI, and we'll make sure we do the data protection bit really properly and carefully. And that's it. I think as soon as you start to dive into detail, you get stuck in the long grass and you never deliver anything. And so we did that. And then, very much as Chris described, we kind of looked at ChatGPT. We made a really good decision, I think, in that the first people we brought into the room were the heads of academic departments. And we said, right, here is ChatGPT, here's the basics. Now you go away and tell us what you think. Tell us if it's any good. Tell us what you can do with it. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. And we had that conversation over a series of weeks and getting lots of feedback. And that really helped us craft our initial response. And we've seen teachers, therefore, using it in really interesting ways and sort of feeling quite empowered to do so. And then we looked at rolling that out to students. So we did a kind of ChatGPT rollout, getting consent from parents and so forth. And that went that went well, but I think there were kind of two major frustrations for me. One was a lack of being able to see what the kids were doing in ChatGPT as opposed to normal kind of web searches. And the second was really ChatGPT and those other models are kind of the antithesis of good teaching and learning. They get the child straight to the answer without any learning struggle whatsoever, and that really bothered us. And in a way, that really changed the trajectory of the work I was doing with Sphinx AI, which was we were building and continue to develop a very sophisticated pastoral and academic tracking platform which uses AI. And we thought, well, we could solve that problem. And we actually built a chatbot which is designed for students, which takes care of all of those concerns. So it speaks to the child using age-appropriate language, but it also has a teacher persona. So when the child says, write me an essay, our chatbot, which is called RileyBot, says, no, I'm not going to write you an essay, but I'll help you plan an essay. And you can upload a picture of your essay and I'll give you some feedback on it. And that, I think, really encourages that struggle of learning, which is so fundamentally important and is ultimately at the heart of a lot of the negativity about AI in schools. Is it's just going to take away all of the integrity of learning. And we've really tried to address that whilst leveraging all of the good things about it.
That point about integrity is really important. Integrity of learning, integrity of teaching. I'm going to come back to that, but I just want to roll back a bit because I was really interested in that sort of three-step process. Policy first. Second, you get heads of departments in, get them trying things out. And then third, you look at the students. Going back to that second step, and it also, my question is also influenced by something Chris said too. One thing I'm observing is that for very understandable reasons, most educators don't really understand AI. And so whilst in an ideal world, of course, you want to say, right, you've got this problem, this challenge, here's a technology that can help you. let's map the challenge to the tech, because we don't want to do it the other way around. But because people have a limited understanding of AI, some of the biggest challenges that could actually be helped by AI are not, because it's not clear how you do that. So how do you help those heads of departments to really see the potential of the AI? Do you understand my concern, Adam?
100%, Rose. I think you're absolutely right. And I think in that bigger picture, Chris alluded to it already, that most schools are not in a position to be able to have this conversation. In fact, this conversation probably seems quite ridiculous to them because they don't even have good enough Wi-Fi. They don't have devices. They don't have the infrastructure. So that absolutely feels a million miles away from where they are. But I think if you are in a school that is ready to have the conversation, and that is the critical thing, you've got to be ready. You've got to have, as we've talked, we've got to have the leadership in place that believes in it, that has the competency to make those good and challenging decisions. Then you're right, yeah, skilling up people to be able to know what is possible is kind of your first big step. And I think you can do that in two ways. One is you give them the freedom and the time to experiment. Very much like I remember my time right at the beginning of my journey with the iPads. I was an English teacher in a classroom with a trolley full of iPads, and I taught some terrible lessons in order to figure out what you could and couldn't do with iPads. But I was super lucky to work in a school that says it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them. And the beauty of it was I made the mistakes and then could pass on that learning to the rest of the team. And that's really important. But the second thing that we did was we actually did training for teachers, but also to the professional services teams in school to say, right, this is what AI can do. Here's some basic terminology. Here's some sort of things that are in place right now. Now you know that. Go away and look at the problems you've got and come and talk to us about how you think AI might be able to apply to those problems. And if it is a good fit, we'll look at it. And if it isn't, that's okay too. But I think just giving people that baseline of this is what it is and this is what it could do helps open up the conversation about what we as an organization want it to do.
That makes so much sense. And I think that's extremely useful for people listening, very practical advice there. Just coming back to that point about integrity of learning and the way that these large language models, they can do anything, can't they? And yet you've just reflected on your own experience of being an English teacher, being in charge of a trolley of iPads. And you said, terrible teaching. I doubt it was that. But you made mistakes. And hey, isn't that how we all learn? And these large language models don't really encourage you to make mistakes because they're always there to help you, always there to say, I can help you with anything. And so I think this learning integrity piece is really important. And it marries very much to what Chris and Scott have already said about the importance of future-facing human skills. So last word from you, Adam, for the moment on that tension between the large language model, generative AI, and what we really want our learners to be doing, particularly for people who don't have somebody like you who can build them a Riley bot.
Well, I think that tension is absolutely at the core of the anxiety that people have. Like, is AI going to replace teachers? Is a thing that comes up again and again, right? And the answer, I think, pretty categorically is no, because the human relationships that are fundamental to the school experience are what matter more than anything else. Like, I was speaking recently and we had this conversation as a group, primary and secondary, all sorts of different backgrounds, that the job of a teacher is to help humans, little humans, become better, bigger humans. And everything else is kind of a sideshow, really. And that remains fundamental. So what we want AI to do is be a partner for the teacher, not a threat, not something that undermines what we know works and is effective for building those relationships, building confidence, building resilience. If AI doesn't do those things, then it's a terrible use of a really interesting technology.
Absolutely, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be really pleased to hear you say that, Adam. Thank you. Moving on now, because we're always short of time on the podcast, and I do want to look a little more deeply at the kind of risks and the safeguarding issues, because that's something we hear people are concerned about quite a lot. And Scott, I'm going to come back to you, because you had this great acronym, well, it wasn't an acronym, but the 3-tick approach. And I'd love you to say a little bit more about that, the 3-tick approach, because it sounds like something other people could possibly try and implement.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. The 3-tick process, I've been at this college for ages, right? I've been here 15 years as a teacher and then digital person, and now I observe and coach our teachers as well. And we've got it wrong for many years, and we come to this through iterating and learning, because that's, as Adam touches on, that's how we learn, right? We go through the mud, we make mistakes, we dust ourselves off, we go again. And when it comes to our implementation of educational technologies, it's much the same. So I'll find stuff and I'll jump straight into it and give it a go. I love exploring and being curious and playing with things. And that's the only thing I do, really. I just play. I'm lucky to have a sandbox to play in, as it were. That's one step. I might like it, play with it, test it, much like Adam and the iPads. And you be the guinea pig, the prototype, as it were. And then you'll feed it back to the rest of the tribe once you've foraged and curated the thing that might be good for the rest of your folk. That's 1 tick, though. That's just one thing. That's an echo chamber. That's a filter bubble, We then, in order to scale it up, have to go to the IT team. I raise an IT ticket and say, all right, you lot, have a look at this. Is it compatible with the system? Is it all right to use this? Because sometimes I've used things and it's not been good, and I've been told off, and rightly so. Wasn't aware of what I was doing. I was naive, I was just playing. IT team will now tick it or not tick it. They might go no, and therefore it stops at the second tick. But if it gets a second tick, I then go into a meeting, which sounds more serious than what it is, but it's me opposite Greg or Claire, one of our data protection officers, and I fill in my GDPR data protection impact assessment form with my team. And my team is made up of students who've become apprentices and then members of our digital team. We'll fill in the form and we sit and we have it out. We talk about why this benefits teaching and learning, and they will challenge me. I've literally got a meeting after this podcast today talking about some of the Gemini Pro licenses and whether we should proceed with that. Well, I've got to go in armed and prepared and to explain and justify everything from a safeguarding and ethical point of view. We've also got an AI ethics meeting every term. No, I'll take that back. It's every month now, where IT, teaching and learning, and the data protection team meet and we talk and discuss. Just because we could doesn't mean we should. We talk about these things at length. We have CPD hour every single week where we upskill on these different tools as well and help people to be more mindful and conscious of all these different things that have been thrown in our lap. It's overwhelming, and we try to make it as easy for people to understand as possible by continuously making it small. And so schemes of work, planning in May of last year, that was the scratch to itch. That was the problem, to borrow the phrase of my colleagues on the call. So therefore it became pretty undeniable when you're a tired teacher and you want a bit of summer back, maybe an evening or weekend off from planning, to see it do that. You go, oh, okay, fair enough. There might be something in this. So using it in that way is something we're really keen on doing, but all the while being mindful of the safeguarding side of it, the ethical side of it as well. And just to touch on something that Adam mentioned in his response earlier on, I think this is something that I know Chris will have thoughts on as well, in terms of a byproduct of all of this generative AI and this boom is that we need to rethink assessment, ultimately. To rethink assessment and to coach and train our teachers in a patient, calm way to rethink assessment. So we've now got students using prompts to help them revise for their T-level engineering exam and relating it, like this young lady in T-level engineering, relating it to, the Airbus A380 plane, which is her favorite plane. So she can understand and connect it, this complex theory about aerodynamic airflow, in a way that she understands. And young Pender, who's one of our future pathway students and a somewhat non-traditional learner, is thriving by recording a podcast as his assessment. And he's researching, preparing, and rehearsing, and developing understanding about the cause-consequence reasoning and forward-planning nature of this politics discussion he's been asked to do for his assessment. So transcending the essay and the exam for more authentic assessment, vlogs, podcasts, professional discussions, witness statements, the rise of authentic assessment, that's exciting. It's to lean into that and to get us rethinking the essay is something we're doing a lot of at the college, and we're only going to do more of it moving forward.
Again, that's great. And I think this business of rethinking the essay is fascinating. There's a piece in the Times Higher Educational Supplement last week saying how many academics were horrified in universities by the number of very poor quality ChatGPT generated essays they were having to mark. And it's kind of, yeah, we've got to move on from the essay. It's not about policing the students. It's about moving on from the essay and rethinking the assessment. So I think these are great examples. And it's lovely to hear about that AI ethics meeting that's now monthly, that was termly, which demonstrates the challenges that we face here. But that teaching and learning, IT, GDPR, you've got to get those 3 ticks before you can go. Chris, I'm going to come to you now. And you've already been kind of given a call in by Scott around the assessment. But before we get to that, and do please pick up on that, because I'm really keen to hear, because I know it's something that you're very concerned about. But I thought you posted something on LinkedIn recently, which was a kind of an infographic about the work you've been doing, looking at different use cases. And I thought that was incredibly useful for a lot of people out there who might be concerned about this. And I'm not really sure, because most people don't understand much about AI, and so they hear it's risky, but what are the risks, and how do we know? So could you start us off on that, but do please pick up that rethinking assessment piece at the end if you'd like to as well.
Yeah. So basically because I'm seeing around a range of schools how people are using this, and it's so varied. What I try to do is go, how do we categorize this? And I categorized it in 5 use cases, really. And again, the way I've categorized these are totally arguable. There's so much nuance to all of this. So what I'm never saying I've got this right. I'm saying that these are some of my feelings, my thoughts around it. So when people first started using it, I considered what people were using, what I was using AI for, was very low risk. Creating curriculum resources, I think, is a very low risk use case. And the reason for that is the human is always in that process. So when I'm categorizing these risks, I'm thinking of whether AI is actually making decisions or not. I'm thinking of what's the impact on the number and range of stakeholders. And I'm thinking about where the human is and how far the human is stepping back out the process. So those are the 3 things really I've looked at when I've categorized these risks. So creating curriculum resources, it was a creative activity. When I was using it to create stuff. Yes, facts are in there, but the human's right front and center probing that, the same as you would any resource in your classroom. You'd look at it and go, is this appropriate? Is this safe? Is this correct? So for me, that's quite a low risk use case. I guess the second level I started to see was people using it for communication, particularly with parents, so report writing or responding to email. And I think this is where there's an unseen risk here, because people see that as fairly low, and it is a fairly low risk, again, as long as the human's front and center in that process. But I think when you're new to AI, you see it so amazing that you don't really anticipate that the response it's going to get from a person receiving that. So where I'm using it for communication, I'm knowing that there's someone at the other end of the AI actually digesting that information. And I think we're in a realm at the moment with more and more people getting to know AI content and how it writes, that if people literally just fire off an AI generated email back to someone, if they perceive that as AI written, it's going to feel, I received one the other day. It felt like I've been dismissed. And I think we need much more emotional intelligence over the output of AI. And so I think there's a real risk there. I know teachers are using this to write reports. And if they're just using it to press a button and write a report, people are going to spot that the soul won't be there, and people will feel that. So I think that's a higher risk use case. Data analysis, and again, it's depending on the data that you're doing. Again, that's a much higher risk, because depending on the data, data protection is everything. So I probably don't need to explain that one so much. Then when we get into the realms of assessment, and again, I'll pick up on this thing here, is when you're assessing work, we don't know, if you're using AI to assess and mark, where the bias is going to come out. And I think, again, we could talk all day about this, but it's probably a use case that I would say I'm not too sure about at this stage. I think it's going to come. It definitely will come at some point. But at this stage, I think we need to be a lot more intelligent about our use of AI. And looking back to assessment and risks, there are some risks I want to mitigate against. But actually, for me, there are some risks I want to expose. I want the cracks to appear in the education system in some ways. And we're going to have to, because of the way the future is moving. And so, again, we've got to be a bit nuanced and intelligent about what are we trying to nail down. And if we're trying to nail down the cheating, I think we're fighting a losing battle. We have got to adapt. And so we want to expose those risks as much as possible, because otherwise we're going to be in a position where we're trying to hold back the system, and it's just going to creak and creak and creak, and it's going to crack without being proactive. So I think there's a case where we have to be a bit more proactive. I guess the highest risk use case that I've identified is moving towards tutor chat bots type situation, where the human is really stepping back out of that process. And again, Adam's product, we've had a meeting, we talked about it. I think it's really good the way it is. It works like a teacher. I think that's a real, again, intelligent, nuanced way of implementing that. But it's the highest risk, because potentially we're going to see the teacher step right back out of that process. So that's sort of how I've categorized the risk. And again, it changes all the time. So these are all going to change all the time. So always key to say, no matter what's put out, you can't stick with that for very long. And again, Adam's right with his policy. Is you try and put a lengthy policy in place, you're going to be rewriting that every day. So
absolutely. And you said before you went through that, which was incredibly useful, Chris, thank you. You're never saying I've got this right. I think we're all in that space. I don't think any of us feel 100% confident about what's happening at the moment, because let's face it, the people who are building these technologies don't really know how they work. We're seeing lots of research papers coming out from the people behind, from OpenAI, from Google, from Anthropic, that reveal that they're still exploring how these tools work. And so what chance do we have? But we have to do something. And so the kind of thing you've created there is practically very useful. And it helps people ask questions, doesn't it? So that they themselves can say, okay, is this a risk I think I can mitigate, or is it not? But I love this idea of exposing risks in order to bring about change. I think that's a really good idea. So more of that. Thanks, Chris. Adam, over to you for thoughts about how we deal with the risks. How do we cope with making sure that what we do with AI is not going to endanger people? Because if we get it wrong, then the tremendous benefits that can come from AI are going to be lost.
So yeah, I've got a few different angles to take on this, I guess. That firstly, with the company, with Sphinx AI, we have an AI ethics advisory board, and we have some really outstanding people on that, like industry leaders in their field. But we also have 5 people on that board, and 2 of them are current Caterham School students. One who will likely go on to study ethics and philosophy at university, but one who is going to study computer science. And he was a really interesting case, because he came to this meeting. They held their own brilliantly against these sort of professionals, but he came away from that and sort of said, I'd never thought about it from that point of view. I just build this stuff, and it's made me think twice. And I thought, that's the biggest win I could possibly have had in that scenario. We've taken a guy who is going to be at the cutting edge. He's super talented in this field. And I have helped just open his mind to, I think Scott said it, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Such an important mindset for schools, but also for everybody in that industry. I think we have very much taken the approach at school that we need to educate the students. That's been sort of front and center for us. So we use our Edge curriculum, I guess, particularly to talk to them about, you know, everything from deep fakes to bias and, you know, all of that stuff. But I think it's also important to say that from a people point of view, AI is not something you can just talk about in isolation. Right? The tech industry as a whole is built to draw you into certain pathways. So as an example, we do a module where we talk about wireframing and UI. And I asked them, the kids in class, to get their phone out, go to their favorite app, and see how much of that app they can use using one hand, and ask them why they think that's so important. Like, why can you do everything on TikTok with your thumb? Because they want to keep you scrolling for as long as possible, make that as frictionless as possible. And like and sort of explaining to them, there's a whole infrastructure designed to make them stop paying attention. And then we're saying, no, stop and pay attention and look at, and that goes all the way through to, you know, I was maybe very naively shocked when I found out that there are lots of AI avatar accounts on social media that have kind of financial sponsorship from huge companies. And we used one of these as an example a couple of years ago. I think it's one of the early ones of this. It looks like this, I think, Brazilian girl who has millions of pounds worth of sponsorship, but she's essentially built and controlled by some guy in a room in somewhere in the States. And it was really shocking to think, like, these are the new protocols that they're having to deal with every day. Like, not just, is this information good information? Is this person even a real person? Like, what? And like, that's a hugely complex world that the kids that we are all helping educate are growing up in. I think we have a massive responsibility to get that right and open their eyes as widely as possible without scaring them, because that's also really important. Because like you said, Rose, lots of good, positive things could happen and should happen. But I think only if development happens responsibly and users are skilled up enough to be discerning and make good decisions.
Yes, it's such a worry, isn't it? And when I saw Apple Intelligence being launched with the slogan that it was going to allow you to do more things effortlessly, it makes me just sigh and think, oh, but you don't learn effortlessly. You have to make some strenuous mental effort. So I think there is a real worry on many fronts about the way young people are being encouraged to use these technologies, sucked in, as you say, by the way that they're designed. You know, the consumerization of artificial intelligence is not going to do education any favors whatsoever, and probably not society. And we do really need to find ways to help avoid what's happened with social media, which has obviously been incredibly disruptive for many young people. So it is a huge responsibility. I agree with you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I don't want to end on too much of a down note, because there are some positive things as well. So I'm just going to come back to each of you and say, what would your last word to people listening who maybe are new to AI, wondering where to get started? What would you say to them as a kind of encouragement, tip? Also, if you have any thoughts on other issues that you want to raise on this podcast, please, now is your moment. I'll come back to you first, Adam, and then I'm going to come to you, Chris.
Oh, it's a great question, Rose. I guess I would say, don't believe the hype, but also don't believe the sort of doom and naysayers either. I think that the battle lines haven't been drawn yet. I think what we've done at Caterham is a thing that I really hope happens elsewhere, where teachers who know what it feels like to be in a school are co-designing solutions. We know that that is effective. We know that, you know, I can go and talk to schools and I show them RileyBot, and I show them, like, we've got built-in safeguarding. So all the teachers, that if you teach a kid, you can see all of their conversation history. If you're a parent of a younger student, you can see that conversation history. It, like, inappropriate content gets flagged, and you show that to a school, and they say, yeah, okay, you can tell you're a teacher because you've understood what the concerns are, and you've made it transparent, and you've made it easy. And I think that is how you change the narrative. I think is show them that there is good practice. I think your example, what you just said about social media, is so true. Like schools got to the social media narrative a little bit late. By the time we got there, habits had been formed, and ultimately we were then kind of reacting to it. And still today, countless years later, as a school, you can't point to a social media and go, that's what good social media looks like. And part of what sort of inspired some of the thinking around the RileyBot project was, if we can at least show, because Chris is totally right, like Snapchat AI, that's where the kids are at, of course. But if I can build something that in a school you can point to and go, this is what safe AI looks like. And even if you're not going to use that, in a social setting, because that isn't what it's built for, at least you know what good and safe looks like, so you can at least compare it against what you're doing. We don't have that with social media. So I think if we can grab that opportunity now, that could just sort of change the narrative enough to mean that we get some really, really great stuff out of AI in the future.
I like that. That's a really nice practical tip. Look at what good AI looks like and then compare the other tools so that you can see what the differences are. So you might choose to use one of those other tools, but you know what's going on. Of course, knowing is part of it, but the way some of these technologies are built, as you were talking about with Snapchat and TikTok, and they're built to hook you in. That's what they're doing. So it's still a challenge, but that's very helpful, I think. I also like what you're saying there about the battle lines are not drawn yet. And I think we have to try and make sure education gets a louder voice in what's happening. Thank you, Adam. Very thoughtful, very helpful. Chris, you are going to have the final word on this. What do you want to say to us?
I guess what I'd say is if we're going to get to the other side of this, if indeed there is another side of this, we're going to need everybody on board. Whether people believe this is the best thing to happen to humanity or the worst thing, actually, we need those skeptics fully on board and playing with this stuff, because they're the voices that are going to... I'm very aware my natural propensity with tech is to play with it and enjoy it. I hopefully have maintained some balance, but what we need is some of those people who are saying, no, this is wrong, I'm not going to touch this. We need them to touch it, because they're going to be the best people to start putting on brakes. They're going to be the people with the natural skill sets to go, are you really thinking about this? So definitely I'd encourage everybody to get on board. I would also say this, to get on board, the way this is designed is to be simple. It's already allowing us to do things where, for coding, for example, if you haven't got those coding skills, someone who can't code can now do some coding. I'm not saying it's going to be the best coding, but they can do some coding. And so, when training people, sending people to get on board, it's really keep it simple. Is those key safety messages of data protection, bias, source safety and security, they're really important. Start with that. But the technical bit is, can you write in a box and press go? If you can do that, you can get something out. So the technical bit is the easiest bit possible. And then the bit actually that requires you to get really good with AI is all your human skills that you've been developing. Curiosity, communication, you're communicating with AI. Resilience when it doesn't give you what you want. Creativity to try and think, well, how can it help me? How can it do different things? Building a rapport with the AI so that you know what it's good at, what it's not so good at. Critical thinking and empathy. All of these human skills, developing those with AI is going to help you become better with AI and learn about what the risks are, what the benefits are, and hopefully enable us to get to that other side. But we need everybody on board, not just enthusiasts.
Absolutely. Clarion call there. We need everybody on board. I agree. We do need everybody on board because, as you said, Adam, the battle lines haven't been drawn yet, and we need to get in there. I also think that point you just made, Chris, about the simplicity is important for anybody who's listening who hasn't tried one of the freely available. So free is always a loaded term, but won't cost you money. large language models out there. They are incredible. It is just a little box that you type in. It's incredibly easy to use. And I think sometimes people who are, don't feel comfortable with technology can imagine that it's something much more complicated than it really is. So that's an important point to make. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Thank you to Adam. Thank you to Scott. Thank you to Chris. Thank you for joining me on the EdTech podcast. It's been great to have you on the pod today. Thank you. I hugely appreciate having Adam, Chris, and Scott in the pod studio with me today. It's been great to hear all your thoughts and to have you contributing to this episode of the podcast. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of the discussion that we've had today, and in particular, all those practical pieces of advice that you've offered. If you want more information on the series and our wonderful guests, visit the EdTech Podcast website at theedtechpodcast.com and connect with us via social media. To see how the team here at Educate Ventures uses AI ethically to make education and training better for schools, organisations and individuals, go to educateventures.com or join the conversation in LinkedIn. You'll find a whole range of free resources that you can download, as well as courses that you can book yourself onto. You've been listening to the EdTech Podcast presented by me, Professor Rose Luckin. Have a great week.